and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. Well, like with everything else, millennials stumble onto something and they think they discovered it. And this time it is Kurt Cobain's 1994 suicide. I wrote about this for the Daily Mail. You can go to the Daily Mail online and find my article, or, just listen what I have to say here, because it's going to be equally fascinating, I promise you. So, yes, in 1994, Kurt Cobain took his own life, and it was incredibly tragic. It was tragic because everyone knew it was coming. It was the kind of thing that happened in slow motion, and because it was unsurprising, it didn't make it any less sad. It was one of those rare moments in music and culture where people understood the significance and the importance and just the awesomeness of Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. And I was there. I was at MTV. I was at KROQ Radio when Nirvana broke, and it all happened at the same time as Soundgarden. But Pearl Jam and Nirvana were so much more important to alternative radio. And then just a few months later in 1992, I was hired at MTV to host Alternative Nation, which was not 120 minutes. That was like this serious muso, hardcore Sunday night music video show. And it was called 120 Minutes, cleverly, because the show was 2 hours. My show, Alternative Nation, had interviews and jackassery, and, the tagline was the place where buzz clips are born. And buzz clips were videos where, emerging cool bands, we would play them for the first time on Alternative Nation. And a lot of times that happened with bands like Tool and Nine Inch Nails and No Doubt and Nirvana, of course. So the rise of the band was so meteoric, and it was too much. Every band wants to be successful. Every band wants to sell out shows. Every band wants to sell their music and connect with fans. And it's not as if Nirvana didn't want that. Of course they wanted that. Of course they wanted success and acclaim and all that they got. The difference was for them, unfortunately, it was too much. It was too fast. It was so much fame. It was an explosion. I don't know anyone who would be able to take that level of fame. And it was, for a few years, very, very sustained. So I have known people in Nirvana's orbit. I knew them back then. I hung out with people in the band and their managers and people who worked with the band. I knew people who worked at their label. Obviously, at MTV, there was one woman who worked in the talent and artist relations department, which that was the committee that selected all the videos. And I think she kept her job. Like, her job security was being friends with Kurt and Courtney and the rest of the guys in Nirvana. And she was like, their internal minder and really a buffer, because she was friends with them, between the corporate world of MTV and of music and the creative world that is where Kurt wanted to live. So the point being millennials have discovered Kurt Cobain's suicide, and now there's a guy who specializes in drug overdose, and gunshot death scenes and investigations. And of course, there is overlap because, there were 3 empty heroin syringes and a shotgun, because Kurt Cobain loaded up on heroines, then he had already loaded up on the gun and shot himself in the head. So they're saying because there was no blood spatter on one of his hands, there would have been more blood on his shirt. It looks like the body was moved. It looks like the gun was placed in his hands, that he was given a fatal overdose of heroin. Therefore, millennials thinking that they discovered Kurt Cobain's file, they have now determined that he was, in fact, murdered. I do not believe this. I truly believe in my heart that Kurt Cobain was a suicidal, depressed drug addict who had way too much fame that he couldn't handle or process and no longer wanted to be of this world. So the idea is that someone hired people to go into Kurt's house in Leschi that overlooked Lake Washington, shoot him up with heroin, and shoot him in the head. So, Kurt had already obviously tried to kill himself in Rome. He had OD'd a number of times. There was a story that Michael Azerrad, who was the rock journalist who wrote Nirvana's Come As You Are, which was the biography that came out while Kurt was still alive. Kurt read the whole thing. This is according to Michael Azerrad. Didn't make any changes. Had a little bit of fact-checking, but did not require any changes of the book, which I don't think Michael or the publisher would have acquiesced. But Michael Azerrad was there, became friends with Kurt, saw the whole thing, was with Kurt the night before they played a show at Roseland Ballroom in the fall. I was at that show. So Kurt and the band had gone to dinner with a bunch of executives, corporate types. I don't know if it was MTV people, label people, management. And of course, he was the rock star show pony. And Michael Azerrad said that he sat down, wouldn't order food. He only ordered a piece of cake to be precious, and then disappeared in the bathroom for a long, long time and came back. And Michael Azerrad said that he was clearly high on heroin. And he said Kurt could barely keep his eyes open at dinner. And that was his way of tuning out the noise, the part of his journey that he absolutely hated, which was interfacing with any corporate entity. And so he shut up. He had a really hard time staying off drugs, went back to his hotel. Michael saw him go into his room with Courtney, who was just like, blah, blah, blah. And then, Courtney comes out and was like, Kurt has OD'd. He's on the floor. He's blue. And somehow they resuscitated him. That was the night before the Roseland show. And then they played the Roseland show the next night. And it must have been a tremendous amount of heroin. It did not kill him, obviously, because they continued to play in support of In Utero. Hey, it's Kennedy. Come celebrate my 1,000th episode of Kennedy Saves the World. It's going to happen March 5th. It's going to be live from Langan's right here in Midtown Manhattan, across the street from Fox. There will be special guests. There will be special drinks. And hopefully there will be you. See you then. The following year, that fall, obviously in November, was Nirvana Unplugged. And yes, that is me screaming, "Rape me," when they called out for requests. And I screamed that very loud. And as soon as I screamed it, it was so much louder than I had anticipated. And obviously the band heard it. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be fired. And Kurt said, yeah, your bosses won't let us play that. And I think it was Chris goes, is that Kennedy? It's like, yes, that was in fact me. I screamed that. That was Roseland show was iconic. Nirvana Unplugged, the best of that series, a defining moment for them. And then in the spring of 94, he tried to kill himself in Rome, took a handful of pills, and then, of course, in April, he shot himself in the head. So with all of this new movement, and by the way, while he was still alive, Courtney Love gave out my phone number on stage, my landline, which was super lame. And she was a handful. She drove people to madness. I have no doubt that played a part in his depression. I talked to a friend of his that he grew up with, and I asked him, this is a couple decades ago. I was like, was Kurt on drugs when he was like growing up? And he said, no, absolutely not. He was a beer drinker. Really didn't get into heroin until the time he met Courtney. So she is an intense person. It was an intense time. He broke out of rehab, went back to Seattle, went into the greenhouse of his beautiful home in Leschi that's still there. They tore the greenhouse down, but the house is still there. When I left MTV, I moved to Seattle. I moved on that street. I lived on that street where Kurt Cobain lived. It's like, I don't know, half mile down the road. And was there for several years and eventually sold the house to another Seattle musician, not someone in Nirvana. Anyhow, if Kurt Cobain were assailed by dirty ninjas who were somehow paid to kill him. And they showed up at his Seattle house and they said, Kurt, we have this gun. You get to the greenhouse immediately. So a suicidal guy who'd broken out of rehab, OD'd a bunch of times, and already killed himself. People show up with 3 syringes full of heroin and a long gun. And they're like, Kurt, we're going to kill you. First, we're going to shoot you up with heroin. Then we're going to shoot you in the head. Do you think that he would have resisted? Do you think a suicidal, mentally ill, depressed drug addict who wanted to die, do you think he would have resisted? No. You know what he would have said? He would have said, pinch me. Really? I was going to do that. This is amazing. And he died. He died. Yes, there was murder involved. He murdered himself. He died by suicide. Kurt Cobain was not killed. And if people showed up like that, maybe he paid them. Maybe he was the one who wanted to end his own life and thought he would be tricky. He wrote a suicide note. So the millennials are like, well, the bottom of the note doesn't match the handwriting at the top. At the top of the note, he just talks about how he wants to quit the band. The bottom, it's like, yes, he's scrawling in giant letters because he's lost his mind. He's high on heroin and he's about to kill himself. So his mood and his handwriting changed a little bit and he wrote in bigger, bubblier letters. He still wrote it. He still killed himself. It's still very, very sad. And dredging up the past does nothing to make it better. You are not going to find his killer because his killer is dead. It was him. So just stop it. Leave it alone. Let him rest in peace, finally. After 32 years, it is time to let it go. And, it makes me so sad because when he left a child without a father. He left that child in the custody of her unstable mother. And in my Daily Mail article, I say that she was like a walking flask of battery acid with a loose lid. And she would just spray her contents on anyone that she perceived as a threat. She told my bosses at MTV when I was 21. I was hired when I was 20. When I was 21, she told them that I was 30 and that I worked at a bank. And I had to bring my yearbook in to show my bosses that I did, in fact, graduate from high school just 3 years before. So let the tragedy rest. Let Kurt's memory rest. This is not going to do anything but get people talking. And there are people who talk with such great certainty and insist that he was murdered. And I insist, you didn't know him. You weren't there. You didn't see him. You didn't interact with him. He prank called me. So now I'm calling on everyone to put this whole thing to rest and allow Kurt's heavenly world to finally be saved. This has been Kennedy Saves the World. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with the Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.
Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.